Zek Thor received his orders on a cold morning. The message was simple. He was to join a human combat unit and observe their methods. His government wanted answers. They wanted to know why humans survived battles that should have killed them. The numbers did not make sense. Human units had a survival rate of 94% in fights where every calculation said they should die. Zek Thor was chosen because he was the best military observer the KOINN had. He had studied 12 species. He had written reports that changed how his people understood war. But he had never studied humans. The transport ship took 3 days to reach the human base. Zek spent that time reading everything he could find about humans. They were a young species. They had only been part of the galactic community for 40 years. They were small compared to most species. They were not particularly strong. They did not have natural armor or claws or venom. Their senses were average at best. On paper, they should have been easy targets. But the Scourge had learned otherwise. The Scourge had conquered 12 species through numbers and brutality. They had never failed to break an enemy until they met humans. The base was called Forward Operating Base Defiance. Zek found the name strange. His people named military bases after victories or great leaders. Humans named theirs after concepts, after a refusal to break. He noted this in his report as he stepped off the transport. A human was waiting for him. The woman was tall with dark skin and black hair pulled into tight braids. She wore simple combat clothing and carried no visible weapons. She smiled when she saw Zek. "You must be our observer," the human said. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Alexis Rivera. Welcome to Defiance." Zek studied her carefully. The commander moved with an easy confidence that seemed wrong for someone about to go to war. Her eyes were warm and friendly. There was no tension in her body, no sign of the stress that should come before combat. "I am Zek Thor of the KOINN Military Science Division," he replied. "I'm here to document your combat methods." "I know," Rivera said. "Come on, I'll show you around and introduce you to the team. You hungry? We were just about to have dinner." This confused Zek. He had expected briefings, strategy sessions, preparation for the mission ahead. Instead, the commander was offering him food. The base was small but organized. Humans moved around with purpose but without urgency. Some were checking equipment. Others were exercising. A group sat in a circle playing some kind of game with cards. They were laughing. Zek heard music playing from somewhere. The atmosphere felt wrong. It felt like peace, not preparation for war. Rivera led him to a common area where 4 humans sat around a table covered in food. They looked up when he entered. None of them showed fear or suspicion at seeing an alien. They simply made room for him to sit. "Everyone, this is Zek," Rivera said. "He's going to be joining us for the deployment." "Zek, this is Sergeant Marcus Wright, Corporal Elena Vasquez, Private Thomas Lee, and Specialist Jordan Hayes." Marcus Wright was a large man with dark skin and a kind face. He nodded at Zek with a gentle smile. Elena Vasquez was smaller with sharp eyes and medical patches on her uniform. Thomas Lee looked young, barely an adult by human standards, with an earnest expression. Jordan Hayes was lean and muscular, and they grinned widely at the alien. "KOINN," Jordan said. "Cool. I've never met one of your people before. You guys are the ones with the perfect memory, right?" "We have enhanced recall." "Yes," Zek said carefully. "Awesome. You can remember all my best stories and tell them back to me when I'm old and forgetful." Jordan laughed at their own words. The others groaned but smiled. Zek did not understand. They were deploying in 12 hours to a war zone. The Scourge had invaded the system and were killing the native population. Millions had already died, and these humans were making jokes. He sat down and watched them eat. They shared food freely, passing plates to each other without asking. Elena put extra portions on Thomas's plate when he wasn't looking. Marcus refilled Rivera's drink without being asked. It was like watching a family, not a military unit. "You seem confused," Rivera said quietly, noticing Zek's expression. "I'm trying to understand your preparation methods," Zek admitted. "My people spend the time before combat in isolation. We review tactics. We prepare our minds for death. You are eating together and playing games." Rivera nodded slowly. "Different approach. We spend time together because we might not get another chance." We laugh because fear is always there, and laughing helps us carry it. We eat together because tomorrow we might not be able to. This does not concern you, the possibility of death. It concerns me very much, Rivera said. But being afraid and being controlled by fear are different things. We choose not to let it control us. Zek wrote this down in his mind. He would analyze it later. As the meal continued, he learned more about the mission. The Ven were a peaceful species. They had no military. When the Scourge came, they had no way to fight back. The Galactic Council had asked for volunteers to help defend them. Most species had refused. The risk was too high. The Scourge were too many. But humans had said yes. Why? Zek asked. Why volunteer for a mission with such low survival probability? The table went quiet. The humans looked at each other. Then Rivera spoke. Because someone had to. The answer was too simple. It could not be the real reason. Zek waited for more explanation, but none came. Rivera simply returned to her food as if the matter was settled. Later that night, Zek lay in his assigned quarters and reviewed his notes. He had observed many species prepare for war. The KRYNN spent days in meditation. The Thoraxians entered ritual combat. The Velcrin consumed chemical stimulants that removed fear entirely. But humans ate together and laughed. They told stories about their homes and their families. They spoke of the future as if they expected to see it. He did not understand them, but he was beginning to suspect that this was exactly why he had been sent. His final note before sleep was a question he could not answer. What kind of species volunteers to die for strangers? He would find out soon enough. Part 2. Into Fire. The shuttle shook as it entered the atmosphere of Ven Prime. Zek gripped his seat and watched the humans around him. They should have been reviewing tactics. They should have been silent and focused. Instead, Elena was telling a story about something called a road trip that had gone wrong. The others were laughing. And then the tire just exploded, Elena said, her voice rising with excitement. Just boom, right there on the highway. And my sister, she's driving, and she screams and jerks the wheel. Did you crash? Thomas asked, leaning forward. No, that's the crazy part. She somehow keeps control, pulls over perfectly, and then just sits there shaking for like 10 minutes. Elena grinned. Meanwhile, I'm in the back seat laughing my head off because I thought we were gonna die, and the relief just made me lose it. Marcus laughed deeply. Even Rivera smiled, and she rarely smiled at anything. The shuttle shook again, harder this time. Warning lights began to flash. The pilot's voice came through the speakers. We're taking fire. Landing in 30 seconds. It's gonna be rough. The laughter stopped instantly. Every human moved at once. They checked their weapons. They tightened their armor. They looked at each other with expressions that carried meaning Zek could not read. No words were spoken. None were needed. Rivera caught Zek's eye. Stay close to Marcus. He'll keep you safe. Before Zek could respond, the shuttle hit the ground hard. The doors opened and the humans poured out into chaos. The noise was overwhelming. Weapons fire came from multiple directions. Zek could see Scourge warriors in the distance, their biomechanical bodies moving with terrible speed. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The humans were 5. Zek froze. His body would not move. His training told him to find cover, to assess the situation, to calculate survival probabilities. But his legs refused to obey. A hand grabbed his arm. Marcus pulled him forward with surprising strength for his size. He did not speak. He simply moved Zek behind a broken wall and pushed him down. Stay here. Don't move unless I tell you to. Then he was gone, moving toward the battle with his weapon raised. Zek watched in disbelief. The humans did not fight like any species he had studied. They moved as one organism with 5 bodies. Rivera gave signals with her hands, and the others responded instantly. They seemed to know where each other would be before they got there. Marcus provided cover fire while Elena moved to a new position. Jordan's heavy weapon cut through Scourge lines while Thomas guarded their flank. They communicated in half sentences, single words, sometimes just looks. Left side. Got it. Moving. Covered. The Scourge had numbers. The humans had something else. Something Zek had no name for. A Scourge warrior broke through their line and charged toward the wall where Zek hid. He saw death coming. His species accepted death calmly. They had evolved beyond the fear of it. But in that moment, watching those blade-like limbs moving toward him, Zek felt something close to terror. Thomas appeared from nowhere. He was the youngest and smallest of the unit, barely more than a child. He threw himself at the Scourge warrior with no hesitation. His blade found the gap in its armor. The creature fell. Thomas was already moving to the next target before it hit the ground. The battle lasted an hour. When it ended, the Scourge had retreated. The humans had survived, but not without cost. Elena sat against a wall, treating a wound on her own leg. A Scourge blade had cut deep into her thigh. Blood soaked through the bandages as fast as she could apply them. But she was smiling. "Could have been wise," she said when Zek approached. "Could have been my good leg. You are injured. You should not be joking. Joking is what keeps me sane." Elena tightened the bandage and winced. "Pain is temporary. Dead is permanent. As long as I can still complain, I'm doing fine." Zek noticed movement nearby. A small figure emerged from the rubble of a destroyed building. A Ven child, no more than 5 years old by their species standards. The child was covered in dust and shaking with fear. Elena saw the child too. Despite her wound, despite the blood still flowing, she pushed herself up and limped toward the little one. She knelt down slowly, making herself smaller, less threatening. "Hey there," she said softly. "It's okay. You're safe now." The child did not understand her words. The Ven spoke a different language, but somehow the meaning got through. The child ran to Elena and held on to her tightly. Elena picked the child up with a grunt of pain and carried them back to the group. Rivera organized a search for other survivors. They found 12 civilians hiding in the ruins. The humans gave them water and food from their own supplies. Marcus used his medical training to treat the injured while Elena rested her leg. Night came. The Scourge preferred darkness. Their senses detected heat, and the cold of night made warm bodies easier to find. Zek expected the humans to make camp and rest until dawn. Instead, they prepared to move. "We can't stop," Rivera explained. "There's a refugee camp 30 kilometers north. These people need to reach it, and the Scourge will regroup by morning." "You intend to travel through the night? With wounded? With civilians?" "Yes." It was madness. Every tactical manual Zek had ever read said to avoid movement at night in hostile territory. But the humans began moving anyway. They walked slower. They were more careful. But they did not stop. Zek found himself walking next to Thomas. The young man moved silently, his eyes scanning the darkness with a focus that seemed too old for his face. "Can I ask you something?" Zek said quietly. "Sure." "Do humans ever surrender when the odds become impossible?" Thomas looked at him. His expression was not angry or offended. It was genuinely confused, like Zek had asked if water was dry. "Why would we do that?" "To survive. To fight another day. Many species consider strategic surrender a valid option when defeat is certain." Thomas thought about this for a moment. Then he shook his head. "My grandfather survived a war when he was young. He told me something once. He said that surrender means trusting your enemy to be merciful, and hope is not a strategy." Thomas checked his weapon and continued walking. "Besides, nothing is ever certain. The fight isn't over until it's over. And sometimes, when you refuse to lose, the universe decides to agree with you." Zek added this to his growing collection of observations. Humans did not have a retreat threshold. Other species calculated the point at which fighting became irrational and built withdrawal into their strategies. Humans seemed to lack this calculation entirely. They simply kept going until they won or died. He was beginning to understand why the Scourge had never broken them. But he was also beginning to feel something unexpected. Walking through the darkness, surrounded by enemies, following these strange creatures who laughed at death and carried wounded children through war zones, Zek felt almost safe. It made no logical sense. Nothing about humans did. Part 3. The Line. 3 days had passed since they landed on Ven Prime. Zek had not slept more than 2 hours at a time. He was exhausted in ways he had never experienced before. His scales had lost their shine. His eyes burned with fatigue. Yet the humans kept moving. They had delivered the civilians to the refugee camp and received new orders. A Scourge hive node had been identified 20 kilometers east. Command wanted it destroyed. Rivera had simply said, "Understood," and started walking. Zek watched them rotate duties with mechanical precision. 2 would sleep while 3 kept watch. Then they would switch. No one complained. No one asked for more rest. They simply did what needed to be done and trusted each other to do the same. His report had grown longer each day. He had filled pages with observations, but he still could not explain what he was seeing. Humans were not the strongest species. They were not the fastest or the most intelligent. But they had something else. Something that made them continue when any rational creature would have stopped. On the 3rd night, they captured a Scourge warrior. The creature had been separated from its unit during a skirmish. Jordan had tackled it and pinned it to the ground. The Scourge clicked and hissed, its mandibles snapping at the air. It expected death. Among the Scourge, captured enemies were consumed for nutrients. It was practical. It was efficient. Elena knelt beside the creature with her medical kit. Zek watched in confusion. "What are you doing?" "It's wounded," Elena said simply. "Looks like it took shrapnel in its thorax. If I don't treat it, it'll die. It is an enemy combatant. Its death would benefit our mission." Elena did not look up from her work. "Maybe, but that's not how we do things." The Scourge went still, its compound eyes fixed on Elena with an expression Zek recognized. Terror. Pure, complete terror. But not the terror of expecting torture or death. This was something different. This was the terror of not understanding. The Scourge had conquered 12 species. It had seen every response to capture, begging, fighting, silent acceptance. But it had never seen an enemy treat its wounds. The concept did not exist in its understanding of the universe. Elena finished her work and stood up. The Scourge continued to stare at her, frozen in confusion and fear. "It will probably try to escape," Zek pointed out, "or attack you when it recovers." "Probably," Elena agreed. "But that's a problem for later. Right now it's hurt, and I can help. So I help." Zek added this to his report. Human combat doctrine includes medical treatment of enemy combatants. Purpose unclear. Effect on enemy morale. Significant. Later that night, while the others rested, Zek sat with Jordan on watch. The lean soldier was cleaning their weapon, a massive thing that seemed too large for any reasonable person to carry. But Jordan carried it like it weighed nothing. "You have questions," Jordan said without looking up. "I can tell. You get this look on your face when you're trying to figure something out. I have many questions. I'm not sure you can answer them. Try me." Zek thought carefully before speaking. "You make jokes constantly, even during combat, even when injured, even when death seems certain. Why?" Jordan laughed quietly. "It's called gallows humor. Dark jokes about dark things. We've done it forever." "But why? What purpose does it serve?" Jordan set down their weapon and looked at the stars. "Fear is always there. When you're in combat, when people are dying, when everything is falling apart, fear is right there with you. You can't make it go away. You can't pretend it doesn't exist. So you have to find a way to live with it." They smiled, but there was something sad in it. Laughing helps. When you make a joke about death, you're telling death that it doesn't own you. You're saying that even if it takes you, it can't take your spirit first. This seems irrational. Oh, it absolutely is. Humans are irrational creatures. We do things that don't make sense because they feel right. We love people we've just met. We hope when there's no reason to hope. We give up when victory is in sight. Jordan picked up their weapon again. "We're a mess, but we're a mess that refuses to quit." Zek considered this. His species had evolved beyond such emotional responses. The KRYNN made decisions based on logic and probability. They did not let feelings interfere with rational thought. He had always considered this an advantage. Now he was not so sure. The next morning, they reached a ridge overlooking the Scourge hive node. Rivera studied it through optical equipment while the others prepared their weapons. 15-1 odds, Marcus said quietly. "Maybe wise. I've seen worse odds," Rivera replied. "When?" "Tuesday." The others laughed. Even Marcus smiled. Zek felt the strange human humor wash over him without understanding. They were about to attack a fortified position with impossible odds. And they were laughing. Rivera turned to face her team. Standard approach. Jordan draws their attention. Marcus and Elena flank left. Thomas takes the high ground for Overwatch. I'll punch through the center when they're distracted. An hour guessed. Marcus asked, nodding towards Zek. Stay with Thomas. Document everything. This is what you came to see. The attack began at dawn. Jordan stepped into the open and fired their heavy weapon directly at the hive node. The sound was enormous. Scourge warriors poured out of the structure like a flood. Exactly as Rivera had predicted. Zek watched from the high ground as the humans moved. They were outnumbered beyond reason. The Scourge should have overwhelmed them in minutes. But the humans did not fight fair. They used the terrain. They used each other. They used every trick and technique that generations of warfare had taught them. Rivera's voice came through the communication device. Calm, steady, as if she were discussing the weather rather than directing a battle. Hold the line. Those 3 words. Zek heard them and something shifted in his chest. The humans did not retreat. They did not calculate acceptable losses. They simply held, and held, and held. The battle lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, the hive node was destroyed. The Scourge had retreated, leaving their dead behind. The humans had won, but Thomas was missing. They found him at the bottom of a ravine. He had fallen during the fight while pursuing a fleeing Scourge warrior. His leg was broken. He had crawled 200 meters to reach a fallen Ven soldier and pulled him to cover before losing consciousness. Elena treated his wounds while the others secured the area. When Thomas woke up, the first thing he did was ask about the soldier he had rescued. "He's fine," Elena told him. "You saved his life." Thomas smiled and closed his eyes. "Good. He'd do the same for me." Zek stood at the edge of the group and watched. He had observed many species in war. He had seen bravery and cowardice, brilliance and stupidity, but he had never seen anything like this. These humans would die for each other without hesitation. They would throw themselves into danger for a chance to save someone else. It was illogical. It was inefficient. It was the most terrifying thing Zek had ever witnessed. Because an enemy you could not predict was an enemy you could not defeat. And humans, he was learning, could not be predicted at all. Part 4. The Choice. The refugee camp stretched across the valley like a wound on the landscape. Thousands of Ven civilians huddled in makeshift shelters. Children cried for parents who would never return. The elderly sat in silence, their eyes empty with loss. The air smelled like fear and smoke. Zek stood at the edge of the camp and tried to calculate how many would survive if the Scourge attacked. The number he reached was 0. The humans had brought Thomas here for better medical treatment. His leg was healing, but he could not walk without help. Elena stayed with him while the others met with the camp's leader, an old Ven named Cernel whose fur had gone white with age and grief. "They are coming," Cernel said, his voice tired. "Defeated. Our scouts saw them gathering in the eastern mountains. 10,000, maybe more. They will be here by tomorrow night." Rivera nodded slowly. "How many fighters do you have?" "Fighters." Cernel made a sound that might have been a laugh. "We are farmers, teachers, artists. We have never needed fighters. Our world has been peaceful for 300 years. He looked at the camp around them. "We do not know how to fight. We only know how to die." Rivera was quiet for a long moment. Then a communication device crackled. A voice from command filled the silence. "Unit 7, extraction shuttle is en route. ETA 6 hours. You are ordered to prepare for immediate departure." Marcus looked at Rivera. Jordan looked at Rivera. Everyone looked at Rivera. Zek watched the commander's face, searching for any sign of what she would decide. "Command, what about the civilians?" "Extraction capacity is limited to combat personnel only. Civilian evacuation is not possible at this time." "Not possible," Rivera repeated. The words hung in the air. "Confirmed. Prepare for extraction. Command out." The communication ended. Cernel's eyes fell to the ground. He understood. Everyone understood. The humans would leave, and the Ven would die. Rivera took a deep breath. Then she raised the communication device again. "Negative, command. We're staying." The silence that followed was absolute. Zek felt his scales tighten against his body. He had studied military protocols from 100 species. What Rivera had just done was unthinkable. She had disobeyed a direct order. In most militaries, this was punishable by death. Repeat your last, Unit 7. I said negative. We are not leaving these people. Send reinforcements or don't, but we are staying. Another long silence. Then, understood, Unit 7. You will face disciplinary action upon return. Command out. Rivera put the device away and turned to her team. Anyone want to get on that shuttle? No one spoke. No one moved to leave. Jordan actually smiled. Wouldn't miss this for anything, boss. Marcus was already pulling out maps of the area. We need to set up defensive positions. Use the terrain to funnel them into kill zones. It won't stop 10,000, but it might slow them down. What's the point? Zek asked. He could not understand what he was seeing. You cannot win this fight. The numbers are impossible. You will all die, and the civilians will still be killed. Rivera looked at him with an expression Zek could not read. Maybe, but maybe not. And even if we can't save them all, we might save some. We might buy enough time for something to change. She turned back to her team. Let's get to work. The next 6 hours were a blur of activity. Humans and Ven worked side by side. They built barriers from broken vehicles. They dug trenches with whatever tools they could find. They positioned the few weapons available at strategic points. Thomas, unable to walk, sat at a communication station and coordinated efforts across the camp. Zek found himself helping. He did not know why. Logic told him to find shelter and wait for the inevitable. But something stronger than logic made him pick up tools and dig alongside the humans. Perhaps it was their certainty. Perhaps it was their refusal to accept defeat. Perhaps he simply wanted to understand them better before they all died together. As night fell, Rivera gathered everyone for a final briefing. The humans stood in a circle with several Ven volunteers who had decided to fight despite having no training. They'll come from the east, Rivera said. The terrain forces them through 2 main approaches. We'll hit them hard at both. Make them pay for every meter. She looked around the circle. I won't lie to you. This is bad. This is probably the worst situation any of us have ever been in. But I've seen what we can do when everything is against us. We don't give up. We don't break. And sometimes, that's enough. Marcus spoke next. Protect the center of the camp as long as possible. That's where the children are. That's what matters most. That's what we fight for, Rivera said quietly. Not territory, not resources. Them. She pointed toward the center of the camp where the youngest refugees huddled together. Whatever happens, we protect them until we can't anymore. Understood. Every human nodded. The Ven volunteers nodded too. Their fear visible but their determination stronger. They came at midnight. The ground shook with their approach. Thousands of bodies moving as one. A tide of death rolling toward the camp. Zek watched from the command position and felt his heart sink. There were more than 10,000. The scouts had underestimated. The first wave hit the eastern barricade. Jordan's heavy weapon roared to life, cutting through the enemy ranks. But for every scourge that fell, 3 more took its place. The line began to buckle. Rivera's voice came through the communication system. Hold! Hold! Elena took a blade to the shoulder while pulling a wounded Ven to safety. She kept fighting. Marcus ran out of ammunition and switched to hand-to-hand combat, his large body moving with deadly precision. Thomas directed fire from his station, his broken leg forgotten as he coordinated the defense. And then something impossible happened. The sky lit up with weapons fire. Not from the ground. From above. Ships. Dozens of ships dropping from orbit with weapons blazing. The scourge lines shattered under the bombardment. Reinforcements landed in the chaos. Soldiers from 3 different species who had heard Rivera's transmission and come anyway. Later, Zek learned that the message had spread. Other commanders had heard a human unit refuse evacuation to protect strangers. They had been inspired. They had been ashamed. They had decided that if humans could stay, so could they. Part 5, Understanding. The extraction shuttles arrived 3 days after the battle. Zek stood at the edge of the landing zone and watched humans load the last of the refugees onto transports. Every single civilian would survive. Every child, Every elder, every frightened soul who had waited in that camp for death that never came. Lieutenant Commander Rivera stood nearby, speaking quietly with a military officer Zek did not recognize. The conversation was clearly not pleasant. Rivera's face remained calm, but her jaw was tight. When the officer finished speaking and walked away, Rivera simply nodded and returned to helping with the evacuation. Marcus appeared beside Zek. His arm was in a sling and there was a bandage across his forehead, but he moved with the same gentle efficiency as always. "She's been officially reprimanded," he said, following Zek's gaze. "Disobeying orders, risking military assets, the usual list. She saved thousands of lives. Yay, and she'll probably get a medal for that too, eventually. That's how it works. They punish you for doing the right thing, then give you an award when everyone calms down." He smiled slightly. Alexis doesn't care about either one. She did what she did because it was right. That's enough for her. Zek watched Rivera help an elderly Ven onto a shuttle. The commander moved carefully, supporting his weight, speaking softly even though he could not understand her words. The old Ven touched her face with his trembling hand, and Rivera smiled at him with genuine warmth. "I have a question," Zek said. "You have many questions. You've had many questions since you arrived." "Yes, but this one has been the hardest to ask." He turned to face Marcus directly. "What are humans?" Marcus considered this for a long moment. The question was simple. The answer was not. Finally, he spoke. "We're the people who decided that some things matter more than survival. We're the species that looks at impossible odds and gets angry instead of afraid. We're the ones who will carry a stranger through a war zone because leaving them behind is not who we want to be." He looked out at the camp, at the humans and Ven working together. "We're not special because we're strong or smart or brave. We're special because we choose to care when caring costs everything." Zek had no response. The words settled into his mind like stones dropping into still water. The days that followed were filled with recovery and repair. The camp transformed from a place of fear into something else. Something that felt almost like hope. Children played in the spaces between shelters. Volunteers from multiple species worked together to rebuild what had been destroyed. The war was not over, but this small corner of it had been won. Zek spent his time completing his report. Page after page of observations, analyses, and conclusions. He had studied humans for 2 weeks. He had watched them fight, bleed, laugh, and cry. He had seen them at their worst and their best. And still he was not sure he understood them. On the day of his departure, he found the human unit preparing for their next deployment. They were gathered in the same common area where he had first met them, eating together and telling stories. Elena's leg was bandaged, but she was using it to gesture wildly as she described something. Thomas laughed at whatever she was saying. Jordan added a comment that made everyone groan. Marcus shook his head but smiled anyway. They were laughing again. After everything they had endured, after coming so close to death so many times, they sat together and laughed. It was the most human thing Zek had ever witnessed. Rivera noticed him standing in the doorway and waved him over. "Come join us. We have food." Zek walked to the table and sat down. Elena immediately pushed a plate toward him without asking. Thomas poured him a drink. It was as if he belonged there, as if he had always been part of this strange family. "Thank you," Zek said. He was not sure if he meant the food or something much larger. Rivera nodded. "Thank you for staying. For fighting with us. You didn't have to. Neither did you." The commander smiled. It was the same warm smile Zek had seen on the first day, unchanged by war and death and impossible choices. "No, we didn't have to. We wanted to." The meal continued. Stories were told. Laughter filled the air. And Zek, for the first time in his long career as a military observer, allowed himself to enjoy the company without analyzing it. Later, alone in his quarters, he wrote the final entry of his report. He had been asked to explain why human units survived against impossible odds. He had been asked to provide data that could be used in tactical planning. What he wrote instead was something different. "I was sent to discover what makes humans effective warriors. I have discovered something far more important. I have discovered what makes them human. Humans do not fight because they love war.